Okay, today we are covering the basics of values, the light and dark of things. And this is an important thing to understand because values are one of the first things that we read when we're looking at the world around us. We see shapes and silhouettes and then we read the lighting information before we get into color and texture and all that kind of stuff. Value is one aspect of color. And we've got three components of color, right? We have hue, this ring over here. This is kind of what people generally mean when they talk about color, but there's more to it than that. We have saturation, which is how vibrant a color is, and that's going to be the horizontal axis of this square here by your color wheel. You notice how bold the color is on the right, but as we move to the left, we take out the color, becomes more gray, becomes more desaturated. And then of course we have value or brightness, and this is going to be the vertical axis of that square inside your color wheel. We have darker values at the bottom, lighter values at the top. And you can gain a lot of information from just your values. And this is why a lot of people tend to just start their paintings off only in grayscale. So now, looking at this shape, this is a cube, right? Now you might think I'm a little bit mad, and you wouldn't be far from wrong. But of course, it just looks like some sort of flat shape because there's no lighting information. But if we do add a light source, and therefore we have parts in shadow, we have a shadow plane here, and then some of it is also receiving more light here on the top. Now we have a cube, and we can tell from this where our light is coming from. We've got a shadow on the bottom left and a much lighter plane on top, therefore our light must be coming from the upper right. There's more that you can gain from values though, and your choice of values can help to depict how inherently light or dark of a color a shape is. So to illustrate my point here, let's first set up a very basic value scale. Okay, I'm going to pick a mid-gray here. Then I'm going to go to almost black and almost white, and then find values in between each of those to make a 5-point value scale. And now we're going to do the same thing with these shapes, but I want the one on the left to look as though it is a distinctly lighter object than the one on the right. But they're being hit by the same light, they're the same material, so the way the light behaves isn't going to be any different. But I know that the shadow and lighter planes of one object are going to look very different from the other because of the local color of these shapes. So I'm going to make this one on the left a little bit lighter. It's the second value that I've got picked here. And then the one on the right, I'm going to make my fourth value on the scale here. Now I know that the shadow on the lighter side is not going to be as dark as the shadow on the right side. And same with the light planes. So I'm just going to drop down one value to create the shadow plane on my lighter object. And then step one up to create the lighter plane. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the right hand side. I'm going to step down one value to do my dark plane, step one up to do my lighter plane. Now you'll notice that I just used the same value, the mid-gray, as I used for the shadow side of my lighter cube as the top plane of my darker cube. But they look so different. And now we start getting to the relationship of how values look when placed next to one another. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to take my second and my fourth values here and just make a little rectangle. And then I'm going to drop that mid-tone in the center of each. Now you notice how different they look? The one on top looks so much darker when it's surrounded by a lighter value than the one down below, where it looks much lighter surrounded by a darker value. And you want to pay attention to those relationships. So we only needed 3 values to give all the lighting information we needed on our cubes. Okay, so now how does this all relate to painting? Now painting is just building up an image with a combination of shapes of color, right? But we've taken out a lot of color information. There's no hue, there's no saturation. There is only value. So here we're going to be painting by combining shapes of value. And this is how I want you to see things that you're going to paint, breaking it down into simple shapes rather than thinking about what the object is necessarily and how it should look. So here we've got a simple apple, right? I just grabbed this picture from Unsplash. There's lots of free to use images there that you can use for reference. And I'm not going to worry too much about the background. I'm going to simplify this whole thing. But it's a little difficult to read the values right now with all this vibrant color information. So what you can do is create a new layer on top of this, grab your paint bucket tool and fill it with black. And now you're going to change the layer mode to color. And that's going to desaturate anything that's below that layer. Okay, so now we've got a nice grayscale version of our reference photo. And from here I want to break things down into simpler shapes and simpler values. What's really helpful with this is to squint your eyes so that you're not reading any unnecessary information like texture, for example. When you squint your eyes, it becomes a little easier to figure out these different shapes. And then I want to simplify this down into just 3 values, okay? 1 shadow, 1 mid, and 1 light. There's obviously a lot more going on in here, but for starting things out, I want to just keep things to those 3 values. So we can start to draw around our shape here. And I'm going to include, as much as the shadow being cast by the apple is a little bit lighter, I'm going to include that as part of my overall shadow shape. Then we've got this little pie slice shape over here where the stalk kind of goes into. Then we have our highlight shape, and then the rest sort of fits in as our mid gray. And that's as much as we really need to see in order to get started. We have a few very simple shapes that when we block in should start to read like a rounded object, potentially an apple. If you want to stylize things a little bit more, you could instead go with more angular lines. I quite enjoy doing things this way because there are some noticeable turns. As much as this is quite a round object, there are still some noticeable places where the form kind of changes. So if you want to stylize that, then you can work with this more angular approach. Now when we get started with painting, I first want to fill in the entire shape, the silhouette. I'm going to work mostly with this 5-point value scale, but again I'm going to start with just 3 tones. 1 light, 1 mid, 1 dark. Okay, so I'm going to grab my mid here and then block in the overall shape that I'm painting. Just the silhouette of the apple and its shadow. And I'm using the pencil tool here in Magma, nothing fancy. You can use whatever brush you want. It doesn't matter for the stage. You might want to make it quite big though so that you can fill in that shape more easily and not getting caught up on trying to define very specific little details or specific points in the painting. You just want to get the overall shape down as though you were squinting at it. So we have our apple and then we put in the shadow as well. Doesn't have to be perfect. We'll still paint over and make some changes to things as we go along. It's a starting point that looks okay. From here we can start adding in a few additional values like the highlights and maybe a bit of the background as well. And you'll see how the subject starts to come forward when we contrast that with a really light background like this. High contrast draws more attention, makes your subject stand out and come forward a bit more. So if you want to push certain things into the background of your painting, you don't want your viewer to pay as much attention to it, then drop the contrast, bring the values closer together. But if you want something to stand out to them, you want their attention to be there, increase the contrast. So that's about it. This starts to read as though it could be an apple when we zoom out. And now maybe you want to start smoothing out some of the edges between your values. And to do this, you don't need a special brush, you don't need a special blending tool. you can just drop the opacity of your existing brush or your pencil to about, say, 30 to 50%, and then start going over those edges and color picking along the way. And something else that starts happening here is, because this apple is set in quite a light environment, we've got this light coming from the top right, it's casting a shadow down, but around that, the surface that's catching light is also reflecting it, and some of that light is going to bounce back onto our apple. And you can see this in the reference image. It's very subtle, it's a very gentle thing. You're not going to have a hard highlight, but you are going to have a lighter value just along that edge. So I'm going to come in and just very lightly add that in. The surface that the apple is on as well is lighter than the apple itself, so the shadow is going to look a little different than it does on the apple. It's going to be a bit lighter, but where those two make contact, we're still going to have quite a dark value still. And I'm going to encourage you here to work on just a single layer and with a single brush, no erasing. If you make a mistake, paint over it, color pick and paint over it, carve back in, because if you want to get a more traditional feel to your painting, this will be very helpful with that, because with a traditional canvas you don't have any undo buttons, you have to paint over it. And so you start layering in lots of information to your painting, it starts to have a bit more history, a lot more texture, so this is definitely a good approach for that. And that's about it. This is the basics of getting a painting down, painting an apple in 10 minutes or whatever, however long we've spent on this. Everything else from here is just rendering. When we zoom out, it should read already like an apple. I recommend doing a whole bunch of these. You can find plenty of images of apples on Pinterest or on Unsplash. And when you do them, again, focus on shapes. Reading the shapes and the lighting information first is really important for moving forward and developing your painting ability. So I hope you found this interesting and useful. I do have some tablet reviews lined up that I am working on slowly but surely, but I hope in the meantime you found these sort of instructional videos of value. And if you did, let me know, drop a comment below, or if you have any questions, something didn't quite make sense, or if you have any suggestions, I'm open to that. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. I'll chat to you guys soon for another video.